Thea did not turn when Mrs. Langford called her name from across the dinner table. She already knew she hadn't heard it. Not the full sound of it. Not from that distance. Not from that direction. But she understood what was happening when the room went quiet, and 23 faces turned toward her in the candlelight, and she set her fork down very slowly, and she decided in the space between one breath and the next what she was going to do. She had 3 weeks until that dinner to become someone worth defending. She had not known that was what those 3 weeks would be for. She had thought they would simply be the beginning of enduring a life she had agreed to, for reasons that seemed reasonable in August, and felt considerably more complicated by November. The coach came through the iron gate of Cheswick House on a gray Wednesday in November 1857, and Thea Holbrook, Mrs. Cheswick now, though the name still sat strangely on her, did not look out the window for the last half-mile of road. She had always managed difficult things by taking them piece by piece. The marriage had been her father's arrangement, made in the spring when Judge Holbrook's health had turned, and his debt had quietly mounted, and Rowan Cheswick needed a sensible wife and not a romantic one. Thea had understood the terms entirely. She had agreed because the alternative, watching her father lose the house where she had been born, was the only thing she could think of that she wanted less than an arranged marriage. She was 28. She was considered practical, bookish, and insufficiently concerned with the impression she made on people. She had been told this last part as a criticism. She had always taken it as useful information. The coach stopped, the door opened. She stepped out and saw the house. Cheswick House was 3 stories of pale Vermont brick flanked by bare November elms, the kind of house that looked as if it had expected to impress her and had expected her to show it. The grounds stretched wide in every direction. To the east, the fields had gone gray and dormant for winter. To the west, a formal garden waited under frost. Thea took one breath of the cold air and reminded herself of the one thing she had come here to do: be useful. Not loved, not admired, useful. That was something she knew how to manage. The front door opened before she reached the steps. A woman stood at the top of them, not a servant. Thea could tell by the quality of stillness she held herself in, the particular stillness of someone who had decided everything already and was simply confirming it. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair and gray eyes, and the specific expression of someone who has been grieving quietly for long enough that it had begun to look like coldness. She wore navy, not morning black, but close enough to count as a statement. "Mrs. Cheswick," she said, not warmly, just precisely. "Yes." Thea climbed the last step and offered her hand. "You must be Miss Cheswick. I'm glad to meet you." Hilda Cheswick looked at the offered hand for a beat longer than was polite before she took it. Her grip was firm and businesslike. "My brother sends his apologies. He was needed at the north pasture." She had already turned back toward the house. "I'll show you to your rooms." Thea followed. There was nothing else to do. The room they gave her had east-facing windows and a writing desk placed near the connecting door to the sitting room. The bed had been made up with lavender-scented linens. Thea stood in the middle of the room for a moment and understood without anyone telling her that this had been someone else's room before it was hers. She did not ask who. She simply began to unpack. She worked methodically. Dresses hung, books arranged on the shelf beside the desk, her worn copy of Culpepper's Herbal, and her notes on common treatments placed in the drawer, where they would be accessible but not immediately visible. She had been reading about medicine and botany and the management of common ailments since she was 15, 3 years after the barn fire. The same year she had quietly decided that if she ever had the chance to learn something that could keep a child from suffering, she would take it. She saved one thing for last. A narrow strip of faded ribbon she kept in her traveling case, the kind of object that has outlived its original purpose and stays anyway. She folded it twice and put it away without looking at it longer than necessary. Rowan Cheswick came home at 5:30. She heard his boots on the stairs before his knock. A heavy, even tread. The walk of a man who did not think carefully about how he moved because he had never needed to. "Come in," she said. He was taller than she had expected. Her father's solicitor had described him as a man of considerable presence, which she had assumed was the kind of thing said about wealthy landowners, to make them seem more appealing than they were. She revised that opinion immediately. Rowan Cheswick was 6 feet, broad through the shoulders in the way of men who worked their own land regardless of what their finances might permit them to avoid. He had dark hair going gray at the temples, and a face that had settled somewhere between serious and reserved. His eyes were the color of winter river water. Not cold, not warm, just present. He was 36. He looked it and not apologetically. Mrs. Cheswick. He stopped a careful distance into the room. I apologize for not being here when you arrived. Please don't. She set aside the letter she had not been reading and rose, because it seemed the appropriate thing. Your land doesn't wait for social schedules. I understood that going in. Something moved across his face, not surprise exactly, more like reassessment. You walked the south grounds, he said. An hour after I arrived. She paused. I hope that was acceptable. This is your home now, he said. He said it flatly, without ceremony, as though he was stating a fact he had already decided and was simply informing her of it. You don't need my permission to walk through it. Then we understand each other, she said. He held her gaze for a moment, long enough that he was genuinely looking, not performing courtesy. Then he said, Dinner is at 7. My sister will join us. He nodded once and left. Thea sat back down and did not read the letter for the next 20 minutes. Dinner was not a disaster, and she gave it credit for that. The dining room was long and candlelit in the way of rooms that have been the site of many important meals and know it. A portrait hung above the sideboard. A young woman in a pale blue dress, painted with the soft light of someone who had never been asked to be anything other than beautiful. Thea noticed it immediately. She did not ask who it was. The venison is from the North Wood, Hilda said. It was the second thing she had said all evening. It's excellent, Thea said. Do you manage the kitchen garden yourself? Greta does the main kitchen. Hilda paused. Rowan's wife managed the garden, his first wife, Catherine, before she was ill. Rowan's hand, reaching for his wine glass, stilled for a fraction of a second. She had good taste, Thea said quietly, in gardens and in portraits both. The silence that followed had a specific quality to it. Thea kept her gaze level, and her expression pleasant, and let it sit there until someone else decided what to do with it. She died 4 years ago, Rowan said. Fever. I'm sorry, Thea said, and she meant it simply and directly without performing it. That kind of loss doesn't get easier, it just gets quieter. Rowan looked at her across the table. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds, long enough that Hilda, in the periphery, glanced between them, with an expression that was not quite suspicion, and not quite something else she was ready to name. No, he said at last, it doesn't. They finished dinner with what Thea considered a qualified success. She went upstairs and lay in the dark of Catherine Cheswick's old room, and thought about all the ways this could go wrong. There were several. The first week passed in a kind of careful orbit. Thea learned the house. She learned that the cook was called Greta, that Greta's husband managed the stables, and that Greta held strong opinions about the proper way to put up apple preserves and was not shy about sharing them. She learned that Rowan rose at 4:30 and was in the fields by 6 and did not emerge for the mid-morning social visiting that men of his station might otherwise have considered their due. He worked. Genuinely, seriously worked, in the way of a man who had always trusted himself more than anyone else to do it correctly. She learned that Hilda Cheswick was not unkind. This took the better part of the week to be certain of. Hilda was not unkind. She was grieving. She was guarding something, some version of the household as it had been, some shape that had included Catherine and did not yet have a clear place for Thea. She watched Thea the way a woman watches a stranger pick up something irreplaceable, not with malice, with the kind of careful anxiety that looks like hostility from a distance. Thea understood that completely. She took it carefully rather than personally. On the 6th day she found the child. She had been walking the East Road before breakfast, the only hour in November when the air tasted more like cold than mud, and she heard the sound from the lane, a thin, labored breathing that had gone past the point of crying and settled into something much more worrying. She followed it. The cottage at the end of the lane belonged to one of the Cheswick tenant farmers. The woman who answered the door was perhaps 40, hollow-eyed, with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been frightened for a long time and has no one who can help. He's been like this 3 days, the woman said. Her name was Mrs. Briggs. I can't get the doctor. The road's been washed out. Thea stepped inside. She did not ask permission. She shrugged off her coat and pushed her sleeves to the elbow and knelt beside the child's cot. The boy's name was Jack. He was 7, with his mother's eyes and a fever that had been climbing too high for too long without anyone knowing what to do about it. Thea knew what to do. She had been reading and practicing and asking questions of every physician willing to teach her since she was 15 years old. which was the same year she had decided that if she ever had the chance to know something that could keep a child from suffering, she was going to know it. She worked steadily and talked to Jack the whole while in the low, unhurried voice she had found from long practice was the most useful thing in her possession. Not the words themselves, the tone. "You're going to be all right. I've got you." When she finally sat back and told Mrs. Briggs what to watch for, and when to send for her at the manor, she looked up and found the woman crying quietly near the window. "I didn't know," Mrs. Briggs said. "The treatment isn't complicated. It just requires knowing." Mrs. Briggs looked at her, then at her hands, then at the left side of her neck, where the collar had shifted while she worked. "I didn't know you could do something like this." Thea followed her gaze and understood. The scar was visible. It ran along the left side of her neck from just below the ear down to the collarbone. Silver white now, old, the kind that has finished its business and settled into permanence. She usually wore high collars. She had not this morning. She pulled her collar straight and picked up her coat. "I'll come back tomorrow," she said. She walked back to the house in the November cold and did not think about what Mrs. Briggs might have noticed, or what she might say about it to anyone. She was not entirely successful. That evening she told Rowan, not about the scar, about the child. She found him in the study going over account books, focused in the way of a man who would rather be doing this than most other things available to him, and she knocked on the open door and waited for him to look up. "The family's in the East Cottages," she said. "When the road closes in winter and Dr. Parrish can't get out from Hartfield. How do you typically handle it?" He sat back. "We send for him and hope. 8 miles is 8 miles. A pause. When something is serious enough, we manage it. Jack Briggs has been feverish for 3 days with no treatment at all. I saw him this morning. He should improve. But 8 miles is a very long way when a child is burning up in November." He was looking at her with that measuring expression she had noticed their first evening, the language of someone he hadn't encountered before. "You treated him," he said. "I know enough to help." That seemed to be what was needed. "What would you have had me do?" she said. A long silence. Something moved across his face. "Nothing different," he said at last quietly. "I'd have had you do nothing different." Something shifted between them in that moment, small, barely perceptible, like a door that someone on the other side has leaned against, not open, but no longer quite so firmly closed. "I'd like to go back tomorrow," Thea said. "And I'd like to ask, if it's agreeable to you, whether there might be some regular way to see to the medical needs of the people on your land. Not a physician for everything. Just basic knowledge, available." "That would be more than agreeable," Rowan said. He held her gaze, a pause that was doing something. "My name is Rowan," he said finally. "If we are going to live in the same house, we might as well use them." She looked back at him over her shoulder. "Good night, Rowan." "Good night, Thea." She went upstairs and sat at the writing desk and looked out at the Vermont dark for a long while before she lit the lamp. The second week brought 2 more sick children and a conversation with Hilda that Thea had not expected, and was not certain she had survived. It happened in the kitchen garden on a Thursday morning. Thea had taken to spending an hour there each day, because the cold work of it settled something in her chest that needed settling. She was kneeling beside the dormant herb rose when she heard the footsteps, and looked up to find Hilda standing there watching her, with an expression she couldn't immediately read. "Catherine planted those," Hilda said. "I know, Greta told me. She had a gift for it, from what I understand." Hilda was quiet for a moment. "She was kind," she said finally, "not in the way people say about women to be polite. She genuinely was. She used to bring food out to the tenant cottages herself before she got sick." Thea waited. "She would have liked what you're doing," Hilda said, "with the children." It was not an apology. It was not an offer of friendship exactly. It was something more careful than either. An acknowledgement, precisely worded, that opened a door just a crack and waited to see if Thea would understand how to come through it without breaking anything. "She sounds like a woman worth knowing," Thea said. "I'm sorry I didn't get the chance." Hilda looked at her for a long time. Then, without another word, she walked back inside. But something had changed. Thea could feel it the way you feel a weather shift in your bones before you can see it in the sky. The difficulty came 3 days before the Caldecott supper. She had not been prepared for Mrs. Langford. She had been prepared for social scrutiny, for questions angled like scalpels, delivered in perfect pleasantness, for the particular performance of interest that meant excavation. She had navigated versions of this her entire adult life, But she had not been prepared for the specific and practiced efficiency of Mrs. Langford. The woman arrived on a Tuesday, with 2 friends in tow, and arranged herself in the parlor, with the ease of someone long accustomed to owning whatever room she entered. She was perhaps 55, beautifully dressed for November, with the particular kind of stillness that meant nothing in her expression would move unless she permitted it to. Mrs. Cheswick. Her warmth was calibrated to the last degree. We have been so looking forward to meeting you. The feeling is entirely mutual, Thea said. Rowan has been alone too long, Mrs. Langford said. We all worried about him after Catherine, such a loss. Her gaze moved briefly, almost imperceptibly, to the high collar of Thea's dress. You must tell us everything about yourself. Thea smiled. She had sat through versions of this since she was 17. I'm afraid I'm less interesting than the county imagines, she said pleasantly. I know considerably more about the management of fever and winter ailments than is strictly fashionable, and I prefer the early morning to any other part of the day. How refreshing, said Mrs. Langford, in the tone of a woman who means nothing of the kind. After they left, Hilda appeared in the parlor doorway. She came to look at you, Hilda said. I know. She'll have said something to Mrs. Caldecott already. I have a friend who hears things. A pause. She's been saying Rowan married in haste, that there's something irregular about your... She stopped. Her jaw tightened. The word she's been using is peculiar. Thea sat down the embroidery she had not been doing. I see. She'll find a way to bring it up at the supper, publicly, where it will do the most work. Hilda paused. I thought you should know. The room was quiet. Thea looked at the cold fireplace for a moment. Margaret, she said, and then caught herself. Hilda, why are you telling me this? The question sat there. Hilda looked at her hands and then, in a voice that had shed its careful surface. Because you went to the Briggs cottage. Because you sat with Mrs. Hewitt for 6 hours when her labor went difficult and her husband didn't know what to do. You've been doing it quietly, without asking anyone to notice, for 2 weeks. She stopped. Her throat worked. Catherine would have done the same thing, and I think I have not been fair to you. The room was very quiet. You lost someone you loved, Thea said. And I arrived in her house. That is not a small thing to ask anyone to manage. Hilda blinked once rapidly. No, it isn't. I'm not her, Thea said. I never tried to be. I know. A pause. I know that now. They sat in the fireless room in the November evening, and neither of them said anything for a while. But it was not the old silence. Not the careful, watch silence of 2 women circling each other, looking for the safest distance. It was something else. Something new. After a while, Hilda said, You should wear the good collar to the Caldecott supper. She said it without looking at Thea's neck. Not directing attention to it. Just naming what was between them with the precision of a woman who has decided to be honest rather than careful. Hi, like you usually do. It won't prevent anything, but it will make it harder for her to make a moment of it. Unless I'd rather give her the moment on my own terms, Thea said. Hilda looked at her. Something shifted in her expression. Is that what you'd do? I haven't decided yet. Whatever you decide, Hilda said, and her voice had settled into something that was reaching for warmth the way the first week of March reaches for spring. Not there yet, but moving toward it. I'll stand beside you. Thea looked at her. Thank you, she said. Hilda stood, moved toward her bedroom door, paused at the threshold. Thea, she said. It was the first time she had used the name, not Mrs. Cheswick, just Thea, like a choice made and committed to. Yes. Whatever he seems to be on the surface, Hilda said. My brother doesn't trust easily. He told me this afternoon that you've been going to the cottages every morning. He didn't say much else about it. A pause. He didn't need to. She went through the door. Thea sat alone in the room for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. Then she picked up her embroidery, and found she could not remember a single stitch of it. The morning of the Caldecott supper, Rowan knocked on the door of her sitting room at 8 o'clock. He came in holding a small wooden box. His hands were careful with it, in a way that told her something about what was inside before he opened it. These were my grandmother's, he said. He opened the box. Inside were 2 pearl combs, old, delicate, with a pattern of small leaves worked along the spine. Beautiful and kept with the specific attention of something that has mattered to someone for a very long time. I found them in the east trunk room last spring and didn't know what to do with them. I just thought. He stopped. For the first time since she had known him, Rowan Cheswick seemed to not quite know what he was saying, and she found that unexpectedly affecting. They're beautiful, he said finally. And you deserve beautiful things, that's all. Thea took the box from his hands. She looked at the combs for a long moment. You don't have to wear them, he said quickly. I'm not asking you to be anything you're not. Thank you, she said. Rowan. And she meant it with the full weight of the word, not as a courtesy. He held her gaze. Are you afraid of tonight? I'm ready for it, she said. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed. It isn't. A pause. Whatever happens in that room, whatever Mrs. Langford decides to perform, it will not change anything here, in this house, with me. Thea looked at him steadily. You don't know what she'll say. No, he said, but I know what I know. That evening, Thea walked into the Caldecott house, with her husband at her side, and his grandmother's pearl combs in her hair. And she held her chin at exactly the level she had always held it, which was the level that required no explanation and offered none. 24 people at a long table under good candlelight. The particular formal kind of dinner that is less about food than about watching. Thea understood this completely. She had been navigating rooms like this since she was 17. She was seated near the head of the table, a position of honor designed to double as a position of exposure. She managed it. She talked to the man on her left about soil composition in the eastern county and the price of winter wheat. And she felt his surprise at the precision of what she knew. Like a temperature shift across the table. She talked to Colonel Whitby on her right, a retired man with strong opinions about land management who was delighted to find someone who would engage with him seriously. And she held her own well enough that he declared her a credit to her education, which she accepted graciously, because she had learned that some battles are worth having, and some are best held for another day. She did not look at Mrs. Langford. She did not need to. She had known since she was 14 how to track something without appearing to look at it directly. 14 years of quiet compensation had made her very good at exactly that. The move came between the main course and the dessert. Mrs. Langford had saved it carefully, the way good shots are saved. Thea had felt her gathering since the soup course. The slight shift in the room, conversations dimming by 1 degree, heads inclining toward the far end of the table. With the practiced casualness of people who have been waiting for something and are now beginning to feel it coming. Thea set her fork down before Mrs. Langford spoke, because she had already read what was coming from the angle of the woman's shoulders. Mrs. Cheswick, Mrs. Langford said. Her voice was calibrated to carry exactly as far as it needed to. I hope you won't think me terribly forward, but I've noticed something this evening that I confess I find myself curious about. The table had gone the way tables go when they have been building towards something. Quiet by 1 degree. Heads turning with the precision of people trying to look casual. Thea looked at her. I called your name 3 times this evening, Mrs. Langford said pleasantly, before we came in to dinner, from across the room, from behind you. And you didn't respond once. She paused, with the surgical timing of a woman who understands that the sharpest weapons arrive wrapped in the most pleasant tone. I wondered at first if you simply hadn't heard, but now I find myself wondering if there's something, another pause, more particular to it, a habit perhaps, or perhaps something else. The table was completely silent. Thea sat with 23 faces turned toward her in the candlelight. She felt the room the way she had felt rooms her entire adult life, completely. From every direction, her right ear doing the work her left one could not. She was very still. She picked up her napkin, set it aside and said, I didn't hear you. Mrs. Langford's eyebrows rose with practiced innocence. Oh, I am significantly deaf in my left ear, Thea said. I have been since I was 14 years old. She said it the way she might say the road was washed out or the fever broke at dawn. A fact, clear, complete, requiring nothing added to it. The room was entirely still. I was helping move hay in the Briggs family barn in October of 1843, Thea said. A burning rafter came through the east wall. Lucy Briggs was 6 years old. She was standing directly in its path. Thea looked at Mrs. Langford, not with anger, not with the performance of confidence that would announce itself as defensive, just with the plain, unshifting steadiness she had been practicing since she was 14 years old. I pushed her out of the way. The beam struck my left side. My ear was damaged in the fall. Lucy is 25 now. She has 2 daughters. I received a letter from her in September. The silence that followed was entirely different from the first. Mr. Caldecott spoke before anyone else. He was perhaps 60, the kind of man whose joviality does not quite reach his eyes, and his voice had changed from the warm baritone of the evening's host into something considerably more careful. Lucy Briggs, he said, from the North Road. Yes, Thea said. I remember that fire, he said. I remember they found a child who had. He stopped. He was looking at Thea with an expression that had traveled several places in quick succession. That was you. It was, she said simply. Colonel Whitby, on her right, said with the blunt directness of a man who has long since left social calculation behind. Good God, Mrs. Cheswick. It was a long time ago, Thea said. I don't tell the story for sympathy. I tell it because Mrs. Langford asked a direct question, and I believe direct questions deserve direct answers. She looked at Mrs. Langford again, held her gaze without flinching, without performing anything, just present and entirely clear. I have been sitting to her left all evening. If she called my name from behind me before we sat down, I would not have heard it regardless of any habit of mine. Mrs. Langford said absolutely nothing. For the first time all evening, she said nothing at all. And in that silence, Rowan Cheswick stood up. Thea had not expected it. She had seen him begin to rise in her peripheral vision, and something in her chest tightened because she did not need saving. She had just handled this herself, had done it clearly and completely on her own terms. But that was not what he did. He stood, and he lifted his glass, and he looked at his wife across the table, and when he spoke, it was the same quiet, definitive voice he always used. No ornament, no performance, no reaching for effect. I would like to propose a toast, he said, to my wife, Thea Cheswick, who in 3 weeks on this estate has treated 4 sick children and sat with a laborer's wife through 6 hours of difficult labor and organized the first book lending this county has seen in recent memory. All without being asked. All without requiring any particular thanks. He paused, and who, it appears, has considerably more of a story than any of us at this table deserve to hear over dessert. He held up his glass. Mr. Caldecott raised his immediately. Colonel Whitby raised his with a short sound of genuine approval. One by one, glasses came up around the table. Not everyone, not Mrs. Langford's, not the woman immediately to her right, but enough, more than enough. Enough that the room had tilted on its axis in a direction that no amount of subsequent maneuvering was going to fully correct. Thea looked at her husband across that table full of candlelight and Vermont winter crystal and the particular complicated wreckage of what had just happened. She did not perform gratitude. She did not perform relief. She simply looked at him. He looked back. She picked up her glass. They drank. The evening collapsed quickly after that, the way dinners do once their defining moment has passed, and there is nothing left to build toward. Carriages came. Coats were fetched. Mrs. Langford departed without speaking to Thea. She managed this through the sophisticated technique of always being in conversation with someone else, whenever Thea came within speaking distance. It was a skilled exit. Thea could almost admire the precision of it. At the door, Mrs. Caldecott stopped her. The woman's voice was entirely different from the one she had used all evening, quieter, without its public surface. I understand, she said carefully, that you have some knowledge of children's ailments. Some, Thea said. My granddaughter has had a difficulty since early fall. The doctors have been. She stopped. Inconsistent is the kind word. Thea looked at her steadily. I'd be glad to speak with you about it. Not as a physician, I'm not that. But I've read widely and I've observed a good deal. Sometimes that's useful. Mrs. Caldecott looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across her face that Thea had not anticipated seeing there. Something that looked, unmistakably, like relief. Yes, she said, I believe it might be. Rowan appeared at Thea's side with her coat. He set it around her shoulders with the same quiet deliberateness with which he had smoothed the combs into her hair that morning. Careful, unhurried, certain. All right, he said. More than all right, she said. He was quiet for a moment. You didn't need me to stand up. No, she said, I didn't. I know. A pause. I stood because I wanted to, because what you said deserved to be heard by that room, and because it's the first time I've been proud of something in a very long time, and I had forgotten what that felt like. Thea looked at him in the dark of the Caldecott doorway, the November night full of stars and the smell of cold Vermont earth, and thought, I did not expect you. She didn't say it. It was too new. The kind of thing that wants to be said at exactly the right moment, and not a breath before. Let's go home, she said instead. Yes, he said. They walked to the carriage together, and if his hand found hers in the dark of the drive, and she did not pull away but held it, solid and warm and entirely real, neither of them said anything about it. Some things did not need words yet. Hilda was waiting up when they arrived. Thea saw the light under the sitting room door and went upstairs alone. She knocked. "Come in." Hilda was in the chair by the unlit fireplace with a book she clearly had not been reading. She looked up and read Thea's face the way she was beginning to read it. Not slowly, not carefully, but the way you read the face of someone you have decided to know. "Tell me," Hilda said. So Thea told her all of it, Mrs. Langford's question, her own answer, Rowan standing up, Mr. Caldecott, Mrs. Caldecott at the door. Hilda listened without interrupting once. When Thea finished, Hilda was quiet for a moment. "You told them yourself," she said. "Yes." Before she could arrange the telling of it. "Yes." A pause. "Are you glad?" Thea thought about it honestly. "I should have done it years ago," she said. "Not at a dinner table, necessarily, but somewhere. I've been carrying the weight of other people's discomfort about my own ear for 14 years, and tonight I simply set it down." She paused. "It turned out not to be as heavy as I thought, once I actually let go." Hilda was very still. "Catherine never had to carry anything like that," she said. Her voice was quiet in a way it had not been before, stripped of its careful surface. Her life was, everything fit her. She was made for the world she lived in. Everything just fit. A long pause. "I spent 4 years after she died, believing that was what a wife should be, what my brother needed. Something that fit perfectly." Thea waited. "I was wrong," Hilda said. Something moved across her face. The specific, complicated movement of someone releasing a belief they have held for a very long time. "He doesn't need something that fits. He needs someone who can stand in a room full of Mrs. Langford's dinner guests and make them feel the weight of the wrong question." A very small pause. "He needs you, specifically." "I think I've known that for 2 weeks and didn't want to say so." The room was very quiet. Something behind Thea's sternum eased by one precise degree. Not resolution, not happiness exactly, but the specific feeling of a door opening that had been closed long enough to forget there was light on the other side. "Thank you," she said, and meant it completely enough that she did not try to say more. Hilda stood, moved toward her bedroom door, stopped at the threshold. "Thea," she said. It was the first time she had used the name that simply, not Mrs. Cheswick, not a title, just Thea, like a choice made and not taken back. "Yes." "Take the combs out when you're in this house." Hilda did not turn around. "You don't need to present yourself to anyone here." She went through the door. Thea sat alone in the room for a moment. Then she reached up and unpinned the pearl combs one at a time and set them on the arm of the chair beside her. She turned her head, slowly, fully to the left, the way she almost never let herself do in company. No adjustment, no calculated positioning. She just turned her head and let the room reach her from whatever direction it chose. The fire had gone to coals. The house was quiet. Outside, the November wind moved through the bare elms along the drive, and from somewhere down the hall she heard Rowan's even, unhurried step, the walk of a man carrying whatever needed carrying, alone, the way he had always done it. She had thought, arriving at Cheswick House, that she was undertaking a practical arrangement. She had thought she understood the terms entirely. She had thought she knew, precisely, what she was walking into. She sat with the pearl combs warm in her palm and the Vermont night pressing cold against every window, and thought about all the things she had not expected, and how none of them, not one, was something she was sorry for. She set the combs gently on the writing desk, where the lamplight caught the leaves worked into their silver spine. She did not put them away.